Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we are taking a seriously cinematic journey down into the murky, cold depths of the Aegean Sea to uncover what is honestly a mind-bending historical artifact. We're going to strip away all the myths and look directly at the science, the gears, and the absolute genius of an object that literally rewrote history as we know it.
So I really want you to think about this question for a second. Let it sink in. What if the world's very first computer was built 2 millennia ago? We typically think of technological progress as this neat, straight line from a primitive past right up to our shiny digital present, right? But the artifact we're exploring today completely shatters that assumption. It sets up what is basically the ultimate historical detective story.
The Yale physicist and historian of science, Derek J. DeSola Price, hit the nail on the head when he said, "This singular artifact quite changes our ideas about the Greeks." Price actually spent 16 years studying this shoebox-sized bronze puzzle, and what he realized was that it reveals a level of ancient mechanical proficiency that we literally didn't believe was possible. It completely forces us to reevaluate how ancient technology evolved.
Okay, moving into Section 1, Discovery in the Deep, from a shipwreck to a scientific revelation.
Picture the cold, dark waters off Point Glyphidia, right near the Greek island of Antikythera. It's the spring of 1900, and a crew of sponge divers from Simi Island just stumble upon a massive Roman cargo shipwreck sitting about 148 feet down. They start pulling up these beautiful marble and bronze statues, pottery, jewelry, the whole shebang. But buried among all that treasure was just this corroded, ugly lump of bronze and wood. And looking at the timeline of this investigation, there's a massive gap before anyone actually figured out what they'd found. It wasn't until 1902 that Greek politician and archaeologist Valerios Stas noticed a gear wheel actually embedded inside a piece of the rock. From there, we had to wait all the way until 1974 for Price to use X-rays to see inside. And finally, in 2006, a Cardiff University team led by Mike Edmonds used high-resolution computer X-ray tomography to truly map its inner workings. So modern technology was literally required to even understand this ancient technology.
Now you might be wondering, how on earth did it go completely unnoticed for 2 whole years after being pulled from the ocean? Well, when the bronze device was brought up from the seawater, it wasn't treated. The bronze oxidized and turned into a green copper mineral called a tachyte. This crust hardened, cracked, and shrank, which physically changed the dimensions of the pieces. So to the museum staff who were excitedly piecing together these gorgeous classical statues, it just looked like a deformed, calcified lump of rock.
Which brings us to Section 2, Decoding the Bronze Puzzle, peering inside the world's oldest analog computer. Fast forward to the 21st century, and we finally have the tools to pierce through that ancient atacamide crust. When researchers ran those CT scans, they didn't just find a few random wheels. They discovered a breathtakingly complex analog computer. But they were up against a staggering challenge: 82. That is the total number of surviving fragments housed today in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. See, the machine came out of the Mediterranean as one single encrusted piece, but it fractured. So researchers had to digitally and physically piece these 82 fragments back together, kind of like a shattered three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, just to understand how the machine even operated.
Because those early X-ray images were so incredibly difficult to interpret, mainstream historians sometimes just ignored the device. And naturally, that left a vacuum. And that vacuum was quickly filled by fringe writers like Eric von Daniken, who notoriously claimed the device absolutely had to come from an alien spaceship. But the scientific reality we've uncovered since then is actually way more impressive. It wasn't aliens at all. It was Hellenistic human engineering, utilizing absolutely brilliant mathematical models of the cosmos.
Right, let's get into Section 3, Gears Tracking the Heavens, Decoding the 37 Meshing Bronze Gears.
Okay, let's dive into this and look at the actual machinery. If we mentally strip back that wooden case, we find an intricate network of moving parts that is just astounding to look at. Here's how it actually operated in practice. The device was about the size of a mantle clock. On the side, there was a small hand crank. As the operator turned this knob, they drove a train of 37 interlocking, precisely cut bronze gears. These gears calculated the mind-bogglingly complex math of the heavens, moving at least 7 hands on the front circular face to display celestial time. It tracked the sun, the phase of the moon, and the 5 planets that were visible to the naked eye back then.
Now, this is where the engineering gets incredibly geeky and absolutely wonderful. The device used something called epicyclic gearing. So instead of just moving a pointer in a simple circle, certain gears were linked with slightly offset axes. This meant the gear actually sped up and slowed down during its rotation. And why would they do that? To perfectly model the exact acceleration and deceleration of the moon's elliptical orbit. That means the Greeks brilliantly modeled what we know today as Kepler's laws of planetary motion centuries before Johannes Kepler was even born. How cool is that?
Let's flip it around to the back of the case and see how this all builds together. The back featured two large dial systems, but they weren't simple circles. They were actually spirals. A pointer had a tiny little pin, or a follower, that tracked inside the spiral groove in the metal. It's exactly like a needle dropping into the groove of a vintage record player. When the pointer reached the end of the 4 or 5 full rotations of that spiral, the operator literally had to pick up the needle manually and reset it back to the beginning.
So what did all this intricate engineering actually achieve? First, it tracked the 365-day Egyptian calendar. Then it displayed lunar phases using a clever rotating black and silver ball. It even went on to predict the exact timing of solar and lunar eclipses decades in advance. It accurately tracked the movements of Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and, fascinatingly enough, it also tracked the 4-year cycle of athletic games, like the ancient Olympics. So it quite literally intertwined the divine movements of the heavens with the social and religious events of everyday Greek life.
Section 4. Genius of Ancient Greeks. Who built the Antikythera Mechanism? This brings us to a really massive question. If we imagine a warm, dimly lit workshop somewhere in the 2nd century BC, whose hands were actually cutting these tiny triangular bronze teeth? Well, historians are currently debating two main theories. One points to the island of Rhodes, which was a massively busy trading port and a real center for astronomy. The Stoic philosopher Posidonius had an academy there, and the great astronomer Hipparchus, whose lunar theories perfectly matched the math of the gears, was active there. The other theory points to the colonies of Corinth, specifically Syracuse, which was the home of the legendary Archimedes. The calendar inscribed on the machine's Metonic spiral matches Corinthian colonies, which strongly hints at a connection to the school of Archimedes. But regardless of the exact workshop, we know it was born from this unprecedented explosion of objective knowledge and scientific reasoning in the Greek-speaking world.
And honestly, what you should take away from this is just how precious and how incredibly fragile that knowledge really was. 1500. That is the number of years that passed before machines of similar complexity appeared anywhere on Earth again. This level of technology was essentially lost until the 14th century astronomical clocks of Western Europe, built by figures like Richard of Wallingford. For a millennium and a half, humanity just completely forgot how to build a machine like this.
Let's move into Section 5, the mechanical universe born, how Greek engineering inspired modern science.
Let's zoom out now to the true philosophical climax of this whole explainer. Why does this rusty, shattered box of gears matter to us right now, today? Because it connects directly to the absolute foundation of our modern scientific worldview. Cardiff University's Mike Edmonds argues that the ancient mechanics who built this weren't just modeling the cosmos. They were inspiring a completely new way to look at reality itself. As he noted, quote, "They came to believe that nature worked according to predefined rules, like a machine. The Greeks didn't just sit around and theorize about the heavens. They proved they could actually engineer a physical model of them. They gave birth to mechanical philosophy. They proved the universe was something that could be mapped, calculated, and deeply understood by human reason."
You know, the Antikythera Mechanism is really the sole surviving witness to a lost history of brilliant engineering. And it makes you wonder, if a 2,000-year-old analog computer could sit quietly at the bottom of the Aegean Sea for 2 whole millennia before we even realize what it was, what other ancient brilliance has history just forgotten? What else is still out there, buried, waiting to completely shatter our assumptions about the past? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning everything and keep exploring.